Welcome back. In this lecture, we're going to make a pickup widget for our weapon class. And this will allow us to know that we can pick the weapon up. And then we'll decide when we should set the visibility for this pickup widget based on the weapon's state. So I'm going to go into my HUD folder and right-click and go to User Interface and select Widget Blueprint. And I'm going to call this WBP Pickup Widget. Now this widget will be simple. It's just going to have some text that will tell us that we can pick the weapon up. So I'm going to remove the canvas panel and simply add a text block. And this text block can be called Pickup Text. Now for the text, I'm going to set this to E-pick up. And this will let us know that we can use the E key to pick up the weapon. Now we can increase the size a bit, say to about 48, and resize the text widget. And I'm going to change typeface from bold to regular. And I'd like to set the justification to center. Now I can compile and save. Now I'd like to add a widget component to the weapon class. So here in weapon.h, I'm going to add a private variable for the pickup widget. So I'm going to forward declare a uWidget component pointer and call this pickup widget. Now I'm going to make it edit anywhere and give it the category weapon properties. And since these other variables have weapon properties as the category, I'm going to give that category to weapon state as well. Now I just need to construct this component in weapon.cpp. So I'm going to scroll down to the bottom of the constructor and say pickup widget. And I'm going to create this with create default subobject. Now this is a uWidget component. And I'll just call this pickup widget. And I can attach this to the root. So I'm going to say pickup widget, setup attachment, root component. And of course I need to add the include for widget component. So up here at the top, I'm going to add the include. It's going to be in components / widget component .h. So I've constructed the widget. Let's compile. And back in the editor, I can go to my weapon folder and open BP weapon. Now here in BP weapon, I have my pickup widget. And I'm just going to set the space to screen space and select the widget class. It's going to be WBP pickup widget, and I'm going to check draw at desired size. Now here in the viewport, I'm going to move the pickup widget up and make sure it's right above the weapon mesh. Now I can compile. Now if I hit play, the pickup widget looks like it's not above the weapon. It's probably over there at the origin. So I'm going to make sure I have a root component set, and I'm going to choose the weapon mesh for this. So I'm going to say set root component and use weapon mesh. So the pickup widget looks pretty good. Now we need to decide when to show the widget and when to hide the widget. And I'd like to show it as soon as the character overlaps with that area sphere. And I also don't really need this overhead widget to show the player role anymore. Now I'm going to keep the overhead widget because we can use it later to display things like the player name above the character. So rather than remove the widget from the character class, I can just go into my overhead widget blueprint and take the text block and set its text to an empty string. Okay, so we need to set up an overlap event for our area sphere so that we can show the widget and hide the widget. So this means that we need an overlap function. Now I'm going to add this to the protected section. That way we can overwrite it in child classes if we need to. So I'm going to make a virtual function. It's going to be void, and I'll simply call this onSphereOverlap. Now, if you've made overlap functions before and bound them to a component's onComponentBegin overlap, then you know that this function has to have a specific signature. The first input parameter needs to be a uPrimitive component called overlapped component. Next, we have an aActor called otherActor, followed by another uPrimitive component called otherComp, and then we have an int32 called otherBodyIndex. Next is a bool called b from sweep And last, we have a const fhit result. And that's a const reference called sweep result. And I can briefly show you where you can find that information, what these input parameters need to be. Now we're binding this to a delegate on component begin overlap, so it has to be a U function. So I can make a definition for this function. And before I define it, I'd like to bind it to on component begin overlap for the area sphere. And again, I really only want overlap events to happen on the server. So I can actually bind this overlap function inside my if has authority check. So I can take my area sphere and access on component begin overlap and use add dynamic. And the first input is the user object, and the second is the callback function. So we're going to use the address of operator, and the function is a weapon on sphere overlap. Now, I promised I would show you briefly how to find these input parameters, and that can be done by taking a look at on component begin overlap. So let's peek the definition, and we see that this is a delegate with the type f component begin overlap signature. And if we peek the definition for this, then here in primitive component.h, we see that declare dynamic multicast sparse delegate 6 params was used to create this delegate. Now we see the delegate type name here, followed by the list of input parameters, and this macro constructs a delegate designed for functions that have these input parameters. And so that's how I know that my overlap function has to have these input parameters to be able to bind to a delegate of this type. So we're binding our on-sphere overlap function, but we're only doing it on the server for weapons that have authority. And now that we're doing this, we can do something in our on-sphere overlap function, such as setting the visibility for the pickup widget. Now, I only want to set the visibility if the other actor is a blaster character. So I'm going to include the header file for blaster character. Now that's going to be in blaster/character/blaster character. So now that I have this include, I can cast other actor to a blaster character. So I can say a blaster character and simply call this blaster character and cast to a blaster character. And I'm casting other actor. So if blaster character is valid, then our cast succeeded and a blaster character has overlapped with the area sphere. So if that's the case, we can set the visibility for Pickup Widget. So let's get Pickup Widget and call set visibility and pass in true. Now we're accessing Pickup Widget, so we should also make sure that that is not a null pointer. So let's add an and into the if statement and check both of these at the same time. Now I'd like this Pickup Widget to have a visibility of false from the start. So I'm going to go up to begin play and add a check to see if Pickup Widget is valid, and if so, set the visibility to false. So let's compile. Now let's see what happens when we test this out. Now first I'm going to run up onto the weapon with my server-controlled character. And I see that I get the Pickup Widget. But let's take a look at what we see on the client. We don't see the Pickup Widget. And here's my other client, and I don't see the Pickup Widget there. And even if I overlap on the client, I still don't see it on the client. Now let's see what happens on the server if a client overlaps with the weapon. So I'm going to overlap on a client, and we see that on the server, the Pickup Widget has become visible. And this is what we should expect because we're only generating overlap events on the server. And if an overlap event occurs, we're setting the visibility in on-sphere overlap, which is only called on the server. So thus far, everything is working as expected. But we do need to make sure that we take care of setting the visibility on clients as well. So we've got the authority part down. where the server is in control of showing the visibility of the widget and later on enabling the character to pick up a weapon, but we're not showing the widget on the clients when they overlap with it, so we need to figure out how to do that. And that is going to involve replication, which we're going to cover next. So in this lecture, we added a pickup widget to our weapon class. And we created an overlap function and bound it to onComponentBegin overlap for our area sphere. But we only did so on the server. So the server has control over whether or not the pickup widget can be seen. In the lectures to come, we're going to work on replicating variables from the server to the client so the client knows when it's time to set that visibility for the pickup widget so we can see that widget text on the screen. Awesome job. I'll see you soon.